Please welcome the author of Shoestrings and president and CEO for Soles4Souls, Buddy Teaster.
Good morning. I know I'm not the first and won't be the last to welcome you to Nashville. It's been my hometown now for about 10 years. I love this place. I lived in Dallas for 25 and wish I'd figured out Nashville a lot sooner. So hopefully you'll get a little more than just Broadway and experience the food and the music and the people of Nashville. So hope you have a great time while you're here. My name is Buddy Teaster. I'm the CEO at Soles4Souls. And what I want to do today is not so much talk about what we do and how we do it and why we do it, which is I could do. I love this organization. But I also think there's a great opportunity to tie into the theme today. And so my talk is called From Tailspin to Tailwind. And let me see, where are we here? It maps perfectly to the theme about disruption and opportunity. So what I'd like to share with you today is the journey of the last 10 years, what we've learned, and hopefully something that's valuable for you all. So I'm not going to talk a lot about our model, but I will just give you a little bit of context. We collect new and used shoes and clothes, and we distribute those in different ways to create opportunity for people. And I'll get into that in a little bit later about why that's important now. But I thought rather than me talk to you about Soles4Souls, I would just show you a short, about 3-minute video that gives you a sense of all that we're doing with a lot better visuals than I can provide.
People. We come in all shapes and shades. We're from different cultures, speaking different languages. Some of us have plenty, more than enough. Some of us struggle just to survive. People who live in poverty want a better life for themselves, for their children and grandchildren. But poverty is a deep, dark hole, seemingly impossible to climb out of.
Côté qui comme si un jour pour la pluie a tombé ou pas qui côté pour entrer au parel et mettre caille abdou dehors et ou pas capé dehors et puis konya.
People living in poverty have no shortage of resolve or work ethic. What they lack is opportunity. Unless, what if it wasn't so far out of reach? What if it was right in front of us? That's what Soles4Souls is all about. Creating opportunity. The shoes and clothing that we no longer need don't have to go to waste. Instead, we can put them to good use. Because something as simple as a pair of shoes has the power to change someone's life. For a child in India or Indiana, a pair of shoes can mean the opportunity to get an education, to go to school with their head held high. For a woman in Haiti or Honduras, it can mean an entire world opens up. She can sell shoes to earn a living and pull herself and her family out of poverty.
Moi-même, moi toujours bon joie dans cœur et moi toujours prier pour moun d'aller soulier yo, capé voyer soulier yo, pour capable joindre soulier a. Moi toujours prier pour yo parce que me toujours dit pour bon Dieu bénir moun sa yo parce que à cause de moi-même, gen l'autre moun encore qui fait profit. Comme si l'aime pour un marchandise là, mais pas qu'elle pour contre moi, mais partager avec l'autre monde pour faire un petit monnaie tout pour juste occuper famille.
At Soles4Souls, we believe in the power of people to unleash good in the world. What about you? What's your opportunity to make a difference? Could you donate the shoes you no longer need? Could you start a shoe drive and keep unwanted shoes from going to waste? Could you travel with us and serve alongside others who share your sense of purpose? Could you give? Every dollar provides one pair of shoes, so your generosity can make a big impact. Imagine what your opportunity could be, and then join us. Because we can do more good when we do it together.
Thanks for letting me share that with you. I'm going to go back to the beginning, actually before the official beginning of Soles4Souls. And in 2004, the 3 men who would go on to found the organization, they were all here in Nashville, they responded to the natural disaster the day after Christmas in Southeast Asia with the tsunami. These are some pictures from that. And they were moved to go into action. One of them came from the footwear industry, 2 had experience with mission and missionary kind of work, and they said, let's see if we can do something. So they reached out to some of their footwear industry contacts, and they got a couple 100,000 pairs of shoes to people affected by the tsunami all around the region. And they felt pretty good at what they were able to do. But it was only 9 months later that they sort of needed to swing into action again. These are pictures from Hurricane Katrina in August of 2005. And they said, well, wait a minute, we know a little bit about this. This is here in the US. We want to respond. We think we can do something bigger. And they did. They reached out to some of the same contacts. People knew a little bit more about them. And the response was even bigger. And they were also able to be there in person and help. So after those 2 things, they said, we think we have an organization here. So they came together and formed this not-for-profit called Soles4Souls in February of 2006. And from that time, for the next few years, it was just like a rocket ship. Wayne, who would go on to be the founding CEO, as I said, he came from the footwear industry, and through some industry associations, maybe some folks in this group might know who they are, they were going through some transition, and he was able to get a $20 million grant to start Soles4Souls. Like, it was really a huge deal. It was a new model, and the footwear industry was looking for more ways to be relevant to themselves and to their customers. And so for the next 4 or 5 years, like, it was sort of nonstop growth. Then in January of 2010, another natural disaster that some of us will remember hit. That's the earthquake in Haiti in January of 2010. These pictures are devastating, and it decimated not only the physical infrastructure, but sort of the social infrastructure as well. And people from all over the world wanted to respond. And so Soles4Souls by that point had an organization with employees and warehouses and trucks and a reputation. And so the response was amazing. Millions of pairs of shoes moved into Haiti. And also, you get a sense from that video, a part of what we do is we provide shoes, we sell shoes to people in the developing world as a way for them to create an income. And so when people wanted to help in Haiti, that was all that Soles4Souls did, was to give away new shoes, but had all these used shoes. People said, can you just find a way to use them? And it was at one point in the disaster response that Soles4Souls had 60 tractor trailers parked in the warehouse in Alabama. So it was a big moment for Soles4Souls to actually show that they could make a difference and to bolster their reputation. So things really they couldn't be much better. About a year later, it turned out that was the peak. So you see these 2 stories. The one that says shoes charity sells more souls than it gives away was published by the Tennessean, which is the paper here in Nashville. And it's not a flattering headline. Even though the Tennessean is the Nashville paper, it's a part of Gannett. So this got picked up all across the country in their network of newspapers, and it came up with other headlines like the other one, the Soles4Souls misrepresents its program to donors. None of those are good. And I think Soles4Souls at the time underestimated the impact that a local reporter could have. They did not take it seriously enough. And this story just got away from them. So now individual donors were questioning Soles4Souls' mission and business model. Corporate donors, people who'd collected shoes in their stores, suddenly everything was called into question. So when I talk about a tailspin, that was the beginning. We can point to that date in April of 2011 as the beginning of the tailspin. Because in the next 12 months, these are the things that happened. Let me stop for just 1 second and talk about the tailspin, because the amount of change that the organization had to do quickly was sort of hard to comprehend. So the first thing that happened after that story was there was another story about how much the CEO was paid. Right after that was another story about him taking a loan from the organization for personal real estate. The board, who had not been paying attention, that was a big part of the reason that all this controversy was happening, finally woke up and half of them said, I'm out. This is not what I signed up for. Then the founder in March of 2012 resigned. The board fired the general counsel. Why Soles4Souls had a general counsel, I'd have no idea, but they fired him. Then the interim CEO, who had been the COO, CFO, quit, felt like he had been gone around. And there was a $1 million lawsuit that was over about a $150,000 issue that was bleeding the organization dry. So all of this happened in less than 12 months. And what's not on this page is that at the same time, the financial situation of Soles4Souls was falling apart. The year before I came, the organization lost $2 million on $4 million in revenue, right? So money was pouring out of the bottom of the organization and it had never been profitable. That's why they were looking for a CEO. And so the story from here on is about what we did to get things back on track. And I think maybe just to make a little bit of a transition to that is, why did I take the job? Like, knowing all of this, and the board was super transparent. I just think they didn't know quite how bad it was. But the thing that drew me in then is the thing that draws me in now still, is this idea of using business to help people get out of poverty for the long term. So the mission was super solid. I was really moved to get involved in that. And at the same time, it couldn't get much worse, right? So there wasn't a lot to lose. So the thing I want to say before we talk into the how do we get it back on track is, I'm an ultra runner. So that means mostly running distances, 50K, 50 miles, 100 miles. And there's an ultra running magazine, and used to be a column called N of 1. Most of us know that means a sample of 1. And the thing I loved about this column is, in ultra running, when you're running 50 or 100 miles, you don't get a chance to practice that very often. So you're always looking for advice and experience that you can use. And this guy's column, I think, was very smart, saying, look, I have no idea if this applies to you. On this race, this day, these conditions, my training, this is what worked for me or didn't work for me. So everything I'm about to say is N of 1. I don't know if it's going to apply. I'm not trying to be prescriptive about you should or you shouldn't. But these are the things that we went through and learned, and so I hope you'll take all of that in the spirit of N of 1. So how did we get back on track? Obviously, I'm here telling the story, so we made it through all of that. So I want to talk about a couple of things that we did and then go into a little more detail. So the first was, we had a chance to redefine our culture and values. Clearly, what had happened up to that point wasn't working, so everything was on the table. This is where we started. Next was to clarify our mission. There's confusion in the market. We needed to be clear internally and externally about why we were doing what we were doing. We had to get business results. The financial situation wasn't getting better, and technically, when I showed up, the organization was bankrupt. Like, we were still the cash was still coming in enough to keep the doors open, but if everybody had said, pay up now, we would have had to close the doors. So we had to get some results. We had to rebuild our board and team. I mentioned that half the board quit. I'll tell one other story. So in September, when the board chairman called me and said, hey, good news, bad news. We'd like to offer you the job. We think you're the right guy. The bad news is, the board had been at 5. 2 of them voted for you and said, we quit. One said, we don't think you can fix this unless you bring the founder back, which was not going to happen. And the other guy said, nobody can fix this. Just turn off the lights, give the money back to the community, and go home. Here are the keys. So that was, when I talk about rebuilding the board and the team, that's kind of the depths that we were in. And then the last thing, and it's been super important for us for a number of years now, is having a really clear North Star. So I'm going to go through each of those a little bit. We had the chance to think about how we treated each other, how we talked to each other, how we showed up. And we wound up with these 4 that neatly spell team. And that was not the plan, it worked out. But the idea of starting with transparency is fundamental to us. We clearly weren't telling the truth. With those headlines, there's a problem about transparency. If people didn't understand what we were doing and thought maybe we were lying about it, we have to do that. So we need to be transparent internally with each other. The first day that I showed up, I said, look, I don't know you, you don't know me, but we're going to tell each other the truth from now on. Like, that's just the way it's got to be. And we're going to do that not only with ourselves, but everybody in our ecosystem. So we have to rebuild trust. That's on us, and that's going to start with transparency. The next was being entrepreneurial. If we were going to work and serve entrepreneurs like Jeanette you saw in the video, who it's not quite life and death, but it is close. Do I have enough to eat, to feed my family, to keep a roof over their heads? If we were going to support entrepreneurs, we needed to act that way. And also, if we were going to fix the business, we had to think entrepreneurially. So that was the second one. Obviously, you don't get to the state that we were in by people being accountable to each other, right? So when I came, every finger, and I mean that literally, every finger, every direction was being pointed. Nobody said, I'm responsible. So we have to stop that. We have to be accountable to each other and those we serve. And the last was about being meaningful. So, like many of you, the reason that we do this work is because we think we're having an impact, a positive impact on the world, and that is super motivating. Well, when you have those kind of headlines, I'll tell you just one story. When you have those kind of headlines, you don't have the purpose. And if you don't have that, this doesn't work. What we do doesn't work. Nobody's paid enough. There are no stock options, none of those things to motivate you for the long term, so it's got to be the purpose. There was a woman who worked for us, Nicole. The first day I came to Soles4Souls, and I was meeting everybody, and I asked, kind of what's going on. She said, I'll tell you what's going on. My Nana called me and said, I give money to you people, and I read these kind of stories. What the hell are you doing down there? So when your grandmother calls you and reams you out about where you work, you got to fix everything. So this is where we started. The next piece was to rethink and redefine our mission. So I'm going to do that by showing you our tagline, which is kind of a proxy for that, and a logo, and how they've evolved over the last 10 years. So when I came, this was the logo and this was the tagline. I cannot tell you how much I hate that logo. It is, everything is wrong about it. But at the time, maybe not, right? The halo was definitely wrong. But it was handmade, we're small, we're scrappy, we're not some big corporate thing. And this idea of changing the world one pair at a time was something like we are doing to you, right? It was very outwardly directed. Given everything that happened, this needed to go away for lots of reasons, but it was also a chance for us to rethink our mission. So we evolved to this, much cleaner, much more corporate, says we're grown-ups, says we're serious, and also this idea of we're involved in something bigger than just handing out a pair of shoes. Like we're involved in reducing poverty, helping people get out of that for the long term and the short term. And also another thing that had happened is Soles4Souls had gotten much more involved in apparel. It started out very footwear oriented, and changing the world one pair at a time didn't capture that. So we had a little fun with wearing out, but we put those two things together, and that's kind of how we went back to when we're talking about being transparent and accountable and entrepreneurial. This was a part of that message. But after a few years of that, we said, is this really who we are? And then we moved into this idea of creating opportunity. So shoes and clothes, that's our bread and butter, if you will. And so how do we turn those things into opportunity? How do we turn it into opportunity for people like Jeanette, who you just saw, and entrepreneurs in Honduras and Eastern Europe and the Philippines and Guatemala? So they have an opportunity to feed their families and take care of themselves in a way that allows them to grow, not just survive. How do we help our not-for-profit partners in those places further their mission? How do we create opportunities for people to volunteer and to serve and to do something with their used shoes and clothes that makes them feel better about that? How do we give them an opportunity to travel and experience this work directly? How do we give an opportunity to our corporate partners to engage their employees and customers? How do we give an opportunity to use their inventory for something more powerful than just selling it for pennies on the dollar or incinerating it? All those things came together to say this is a bigger story, we're inviting everybody in, and then we changed our logo again to make it more inviting. So the next thing is about getting results. And this is probably the most boring slide I will show, but maybe the most important. So Soles4Souls didn't even really have a budget. I found the board book from 2011 not too long ago. The budget is 1 page. So it was just all shooting from the hip. We said, look, if we have these values around being transparent, entrepreneurial, and accountable, 3 of the 4, this is how we're going to do it. So we put in what we call an operating system for our organization. We use a line. There are other ones out there. Maybe you've heard of EOS and some others. But the thing that this does for us, everybody in the organization can see these numbers, how we're doing financially, and there are other metrics about how many shoes we're collecting, et cetera. You see in the bottom, these are our quarterly priorities. So we have a 10-year goal, which I'll get to in just a second. We have a 5-year-ish where we'd like to be. We have an annual plan. We have quarterly priorities. And everybody is in a huddle every day talking about these. So when we talk about being transparent, entrepreneurial, and accountable, it goes the entire way through the organization. Without this discipline, there's no chance we would have gotten this thing turned around. So like I said, super boring, absolutely fundamental to us being successful. The next is rebuild our board and our team. I gave you a little sense of how the board had shrunk. Now we have a board of 23. they are extraordinary. I know all of us in here work with boards, and sometimes that can be a giant pain. It can seem like overhead, it can seem like bureaucracy. I will say at Soles4Souls, because the board had played a critical role in getting off the tracks, we knew from the beginning that one of the ways that we were going to rebuild trust is to make sure that the board did the board's job. And so their willingness to get involved early, when it was not very much fun to be at Soles4Souls, to now, they have done this amazing job of making sure that they are focused on governance and leadership and not management. There's incredible trust between the management and the board. And they open doors. This is a working board. They open doors, they write checks, they advocate for Soles4Souls in all kinds of ways. So for us, this board in many ways was strategic to all the change that happened. The team is the other side of that. So this is a picture of our board and leadership team at a recent board meeting in St. Louis. We were distributing shoes at a homeless shelter in St. Louis. So when I came, there were about 65 employees. And as I said, we lost $2 million on $4 million in revenue. 10 years later, we have about the same number of employees. We have 5 more than we did then, and the quality is completely different. So we've invested in getting the right people, like, as you might expect. We had people who left because they thought it won't work. There were people we had to ask to leave, but we had to fix the business, and so all of that played in. And as we've built back up, we've brought in people who know the values. They know the mission. They know how we get results. They believe and see that we invested in leadership. And so when we bring them in, we get great people. The last piece has been incredibly important. And as you can see, because the bar starts in fiscal 17, it took us a while to figure out. And that is, what is our North Star? How do we know that we are consistently navigating toward the right end? So the first few years, we didn't care about that, honestly. We just had to get the business fixed. There was 3 years when, like any day, it could have been a flip of the coin whether or not we were going to stay in business, right? So that was a lean time. But once we sort of got past that, we said, how do we know that we're working on the right stuff? We can't just count what comes in and out. That's the easy thing to do, but not right. And so we wound up with this idea of economic impact. And I won't bore you with the calculation, but the idea was, how do we track the value that stays with the people that we care about, right? So it's not just about how many shoes or coats, but what's the value of that pair of shoes to Jeanette? Can she feed her family, send her kid to school? What's the value of a winter coat for a kid in Colorado, or a pair of shoes after a natural disaster in Kenya? So we came up with this idea of economic impact. We set a goal, as you see there, in fiscal 17 when we had the first one. We set $1 billion in economic impact by 2030. So we've made steady progress since then. And I think the other thing that I love about it is not only is it consistent and clear, we use it every day to make decisions. Like I said, I won't get into the details, but there are 3 components that are almost always in tension around sort of short-term and long-term. And because we use it every day, we report it to ourselves weekly, to the board monthly. It's a tool, right? It's not something we pull out when it's time to do the annual report. We use it every day. And because of that, it's incredibly motivating, and it's made sure that we are making long-term progress. One way to say how's all that worked is to look at revenue. It's not the only way. You can see, I said we were a little over $4 million there in fiscal 12, right before I came. We shrunk for a few years. We've almost tripled the revenue with only 5 more net people, right? So that just tells you the power of getting the right team focused on values and results and mission, and making sure that there's an investment in leadership and a clear North Star. This is what can happen. At the same time, we're serving more people. Our economic impact is going in the right direction. And our overall financial health is off the charts. Like, we have money in the bank and reserves and all the things that a responsible organization has. So it was all of those things, right? It was the mission, the values and results and leadership and North Star have gotten us out of the ditch. So then in February of 2020, this article appeared here in the Tennessean. Unfortunately, it did not get picked up quite as widely as the bad news. But it was a great moment to sort of realize the distance we had covered since 2012. When the same paper comes out, and it wasn't just one reporter, like I had to meet with the editorial board, they really dug in and said, these guys are back, we think that they can be trusted again, and we're glad they're in our community. That was on my birthday in 2020, like, pretty cool. Very happy about that. Then one of my favorite quotes in the world, Mike Tyson, everybody has a plan till they get punched in the mouth. That was us. Things were great. The press is good. The results are good. And then 2020 happened. And I'm not going to start with COVID. The worst thing that happened to Soles4Souls in 2020 is we lost this guy. The story is right there in the 1972 to 2020, right? I loved him, right? Amazing guy. He was the second employee at Soles4Souls. He wanted to be the CEO, so when I came, we were not automatically friends. And yet, over those 8 years, we traveled together. We were shoulder to shoulder in all those changes that I just talked about. I've never had a partnership like this in my life, and it was amazing. So when he came in late January of 2020 and said he'd been re-diagnosed with cancer, he'd beaten it, he was 18 months clean, he was healthy, he felt great, he looked great, he was off cholesterol and blood pressure medicine, he was really back. And when he told me, I could just tell he did not feel the same about that. So David shared that news at the end of January 2020. He died May 5th. Like, it happened fast. And because he was so important to us, and had such tenure, all of it was in his head. And in less than 3 weeks, like, he could barely have a conversation, right? He just, between the chemo and the radiation and everything else, he just wasn't in the game. So we had a really tough decision to make. And I read the Daily Stoic every day. I have for a long time. I think it's super important. And it was incredibly difficult to be losing a friend and a colleague. His wife worked with us too, so she was going through it, and we were all going through that together. And I had to think about, what would David do? If the tables were turned, what would he do? And he was a lot of things, but a problem solver was at the top of the list. We disagreed about nearly everything, but when it came time to solve a problem, it was nobody I'd rather have beside me than David. So I think he would separate the two. We were sad, we cried, we grieved every day, and we also had to fix the business because, as you all know, a month into David being sick, COVID happens. So we have to figure out all this stuff while we're also mourning our friend. So I come back to this quote from Epictetus, who's one of the main kind of writers for Stoicism. I'll paraphrase it a little bit. It's not the thing that's the problem, it's our opinion about the thing that gets us hung up, right? So thinking about David, thinking about what we had in front of us, was this idea of, David is not going to get better. We are going to lose him, and that's going to be incredibly sad. And we should not skimp on that. And we have to also do this other thing. So that was a moment of clarity for me. And so even though that right hook was coming, we didn't know it in early 2020, it didn't knock us out. And instead, like we've talked about here, about disruption being opportunity, we were able to change really fast. So I'll talk about some of the things that we did. So David was our president and COO. Everybody reported to him, David reported to me. Well, suddenly that had to go out the window, right? We totally did a reorganization in the middle of COVID. And while David was still alive, like, his wife was there, it was incredibly complicated and emotional, but we totally reorganized the organization. We also had a lot of communication running through David. Suddenly that didn't work anymore. So we were talking to each other every day about what was happening. And it didn't matter about your title anymore. It was who knew the right information about where the shoes were, the money was, are our employees safe, what's happening with our partners. That totally changed how we thought about how we worked together. We made a promise at the beginning of COVID that nobody was going to lose their job because of COVID. It was enough to be worried and scared about. We took that off the table. It's a big promise, right? We have 75 employees. That's a lot of promise to make when nobody knows what's happening. We expanded employee benefits in the middle of that. We increased our maternity leave and paternity leave. We got rid of a vacation policy. We allowed people to work from anywhere. We had to eliminate, I heard earlier in the Q&A session, we eliminated $1 million travel program. Nobody was traveling anywhere. We had to eliminate that, figure out the $1 million loss, and put those 5 people who were working on it into some other role in the organization. And at the same time, maybe one of the most difficult things was we had to hire a new COO. David died in May. Mike Shirey, our current COO, started in August. I mean, it just felt terrible. It felt disloyal and wrong. And at the same time, we knew we needed his expertise. All that happened in about 6 months. So I freaking love this video. I think it is amazing. It's hundreds of thousands of starlings with no leader, changing direction, and two things. It's called a murmuration, great word I learned in putting this together. And also, if you get a chance to find one of these videos on YouTube, I cannot recommend it highly enough. The audio is incredible. But I saw this recently as a part of a presentation about leadership and change and values. And the analogy just seemed so perfect, because here are all these tens, hundreds of thousands of birds following a few simple rules. Scientists think they have three main rules. It's match the speed of the 6 birds around you, don't crash, always fly toward the center. And with those simple rules, you get this kind of complexity and change like that. The other thing is they trust the other birds are doing the same, and they know where they're headed. So when you think about those 3 ideas coming from this, that's really powerful for us to think about. But it's also super practical. Because these birds stay together, change direction and speed, they stay safe. By staying together, they stay safe. They're not singled out and allowed to be attacked by a hawk or a falcon or some other kind of predator, right? So it's beautiful, there's complexity, there's simplicity, but there's also this incredible practical thing. And I promise I'm going to relate this back. I don't know if more change is ahead. It certainly seems like it. Sometimes it seems kind of cliche to say change, but we know now in a way that we didn't 2 years ago that earth-shattering change can happen like that. And it will change us now and forever. And it's not just us, it's us and our families and our organizations and our industries and our cities, countries. The whole world is different. It's probably going to happen again, probably going to happen in our lifetimes. So if that's true, I think these birds have a great lesson for us, and that is if we can change together, repeatedly and instantly, we can stay safe. There's a lot to learn here. I don't know if anything I've shared in the last 30 minutes or so is helpful. Like I said, that N of 1 idea is, I think it applies a lot of the time. But I do know that when I came to Soles4Souls 10 years ago, we had every reason to try everything new in different ways. You know, sometimes the idea of nothing left to lose is a threat, right? You should be afraid of me if I say that. But it's also incredibly freeing. And by having that attitude, finding our simple rules, we were able, I think, to be reasonably successful at Soles4Souls in the last 10 years of focusing on values and mission and results and leadership and a North Star, and having that attitude of not being afraid to lose. Then I think the next thing is for me as a leader, and then as a parent and a friend and a partner, I find myself asking the question all the time, why is it so hard to change? What is it that takes a crisis for us to go from saying, that's impossible, to not only is it possible, but it's possible right now? And I think that might be an incredibly important lesson for us to remember, is that it's not only when we have to, but if we can get ahead of that, it's really powerful. So I don't know if I'm the right person to get Soles4Souls to the next 10 years, right? I'm 58. I want to spend the rest of my working career at Soles4Souls if I can. I love what we do, why we do it, how we do it, who we do it with. But I think if there's anything I've learned the last 10 years, it's that I might not be that person. That N of 1, it applied then and there with those people and those conditions, but it might not be ahead for me to play that role. And that is a really scary thing to think about, to talk about, but it's also incredibly freeing. Back to that Epictetus quote, if I can separate what's really happening from my feeling about that, that gives me and the organization a lot of room to run. So that's probably my final thought about it, is things are going to keep changing, probably going to keep changing faster. There's no reason to think that's going to be different in the future. But for me, if I can come back to a few simple rules, so we had those 5, a few simple rules, and also look for places and ways to change before I'm forced to, that might be the most valuable, important thing that I can do and share. And I learned it from the birds, right? Those three things about simple rules, change fast, and act like you have nothing to lose, I think are things that are going to stay with me for a long time. So I'm going to finish on a little bit of a positive note, but I think really hopefully brings this all together. So in late 2019, we were looking for ways to be more relevant and helpful and useful here in the US. You know, the video that you saw, almost all that was outside the US. So how do we show up here? We've been sort of futzing around with it and hadn't really found an answer. And so the woman who had just retired from running the biggest food bank here in Middle Tennessee, Second Harvest Food Bank, Janie retired, and she said, look, I'm looking for a few projects. I said, I would like to hire you. Can you come and help us figure out how to show up here in the US more? And she said, sure. So she talked to people, talked to our team. She came back maybe 6 weeks, 2 months later and said, I think I know what the right thing to do is. She said, I've been inside schools for 30 years helping to feed kids. So food and shelter, definitely the first two most important things. But the next thing that these kids need is shoes. We're like, hey, Janie, I get that we're paying you for this project, but like shoes is not probably the answer. She said, you should talk to folks and draw your own conclusions. So she made a bunch of introductions here in Nashville and across the country. And we started talking to administrators and teachers and parents and kids about shoes. Well, it turns out food and shelter are the most important, but clothes are relatively easier now. There are more uniforms, more companies and people are aware of that, so there's a lot of donations. Nobody thinks much about shoes. So when schools who have no money to help these kids experiencing homelessness, right, they just don't have it, they just go onto Amazon and they buy the cheapest shoes they can find, which is a lot better than nothing. We should be clear about that. But there's a whole bunch that leaves on the table. Do those kids feel like they belong? Are the kids able to be in PE and after school activities? There are all these other things that sort of get left behind when that's the case. So as we started talking to more teachers and administrators around this, we said, well, we should lean into this a little bit. Remember now, we're into COVID by this point. And so in October of 2020, we did a pilot with Foot Locker. They donated $250,000, so it was a lot of money, and 20,000 pairs of brand new sneakers, like unbelievable shoes. And they said, let's test this idea. So we went to maybe 20 school districts around the US and we said, can we do this? Can we fulfill it? Can we get the shoes, the right shoes for the right kids at the right time? And is this matter for the schools? Well, no surprise, it was a huge success. The feedback was like, yeah, we need more of this. And also we said, okay, if it's shoes and kids need, we ought to be involved. Soles4Souls seems to be built for that. But we also got a scale of the problem. So right here in Nashville, if you guys have been out and around, there's cranes, there's a lot of growth, a lot of prosperity. We're opening a Ferrari dealer out by the airport. There's money in this town. There are 4,000 kids in this school district who experience homelessness every year. It's 1.5 million nationwide. Like, it's a big problem. So once we knew all that, we had a lot of debate internally and with our board. And it came down to, should we sort of keep our powder dry? There's a lot of uncertainty. This is an expensive undertaking. We have no expertise in scaling up this kind of thing. And then there was let's go back to who we are, why we exist, what impact are we trying to have? And in those that we serve, their uncertainty is way more than our uncertainty, right? Homelessness was likely to increase. All the things that go around that of instability were on the increase. We should act. So we launched this program about a year ago, and since we've started, we've distributed 65,000 pairs of shoes. It'll be 75,000 this year, 150,000 next year. And so we are committed to getting to that 1.5 million over the next 5 or 6 years. And when I come back to the theme and to my title about tailspin to tailwind, this is a time when we could have pulled back and said, let's just wait until things calm down and we're ready. And instead, we leaned into our mission, we leaned into who we are, and we took advantage of an opportunity that nobody was out there solving and that we feel like we could find the need. And so with that, I think we have been true to who we are. We've helped impact the world in a positive way, and hopefully we've created the next 10-year transformation for Soles4Souls. So with that, I want to thank you for the chance. I've never done this talk before. When Deb Zabladil, whom I've known for a long time through YPO, I also have another colleague I think I see here, who I met 32 years ago at the Young Presidents Organization. The chance to think about this and talk about this has been really valuable for me. I'm not a professional speaker, but it has been helpful for me to understand what we've learned and maybe start to share that. So hopefully you found something valuable. Have some time for Q&A if anybody's interested, and I want to thank you all for letting me talk with you.
buddy, thanks. That was fantastic. Just curious, it seemed that you had a pretty good idea of what you were getting into. So what possessed you to actually do it?
Yeah. I have to be careful. My wife is here. I don't want to. I don't want to tell a different story than I told her. Look, it really is as sort of hallmarky as it sounds. It was the mission. I really believe that this idea that we could use business principles to help work on poverty mattered. The idea that we could that anybody can give enough stuff away to change that cycle just doesn't seem to have ever worked. And so this idea that we could use the power of the market, which I know some people believe and some people don't, but we see it time after time when people buy shoes instead of get them for free, and they are elevated from recipients to customers, and it's an equal relationship. This woman, Jeanette, you saw in the video, she is terrifying. Like, she's an amazing entrepreneur and ferocious in it. If she just had to be happy with what we gave her, she doesn't get to do that. But as a customer, she's paying. She's like, I need it cheaper, I need it better, I need it faster. That's remarkable kind of equity that she didn't have before. So as I learned more about it, that mission was what drew me. The other thing that I would say is I couldn't make it worse. Like, it maybe was going to go down the tubes, and I believed in the mission. I really wanted to get back into the not-for-profit. I'd been in the for-profit world for a while. I really wanted to get back in the not-for-profit world, and this seemed like a perfect match. As I said, my wife and I, we had a long 9 months sort of working through that to see if it was going to happen, but it's been the best thing I've done in my life. The last 10 years, there's never been one day I've regretted the decision.
Hi, Betty. I wanted to ask you how you trained your staff on understanding the financials. You had the aligned scorecard, but you had to educate the whole staff on financials. So how did you do that?
It's a great question, because when we started, nobody on our team had ever seen the financials. And so it was terrifying because it was just a sea of red. And so I think there were a couple of things. Many of you in this room are used to not-for-profit accounting. One thing I didn't know was how you track gifts in kind. So when people donate product like this, I don't think I can swear in here, but the accounting is bullshit. There are no rules about how it works, but it's legal, it's GAAP accounting. And so what we had to get used to at Soles4Souls was to stop reporting on that when it made things look fantastic, and just report on cash, which made them look terrible. And that was the reality. And so it was a huge change because people thought, well, we're a $100 million organization. Nope, $4 million and losing 2. So there was not a very nice transition like, oh, we're gonna go in easy. It's like, hey y'all, everything is on fire. These are the numbers, let's be honest about that. So it was a little bit of training by fire, and we still do it. The idea of what's the difference between revenue and cash and accounts receivable and liquidity, we talk about every week at our all hands meeting. So it's never stopped at all.
Thank you for being here. You may not be a professional speaker, but you're a great storyteller.
Well,
I really appreciate
Thank you. Thank you.
Story's inspiring. If you'll geek out a little bit on this, I think all of us struggle with, it's easy to count the numbers of number of shoes, number of clothes, but your North Star is impact. So could you give a little more detail about how you measure overall impact to this?
Sure. Thank you for asking that. The first thing to say is we went down some dead ends. So we definitely tried to count how much did entrepreneurs' incomes increase, how many people did we employ by selling shoes, and there's value in that, but there were 2 things. 3 things. One, we learned that's very hard information to collect consistently. It's very difficult. A lot of the people we work with are not literate, they're very numerate, they are great at making money, but sending them surveys and filling out forms, that's not happening. The second thing is, often there is a distrust. Like if you tell us the truth about how successful your business is, we'll come back and raise your prices or whatever. So there was this weird power dynamic. And then the last thing was it didn't capture the value of what we gave away for free, which is a big part of our mission. So we couldn't leave all that aside. So we got to this idea of, and we wound up making some educated guesses that we are now actually going back and validating this month, of saying, what's it worth? This pair of shoes, what does it generate in cash? What is the equivalent cost of a pair of shoes or a coat or a piece of clothing if we give it away for free? So some of it's guesswork, right? And we're in places like Haiti where the currency is wildly, fluctuates wildly. We're in places where it's maybe mostly a barter economy. So we've had to make some changes, but I think the two biggest things were we captured everything that we were doing, we put a value on it that we validated the best we could with our on-the-ground partners, and we have been consistent in applying that. So whether or not it's right, it tells us, are we making progress? Like, we're not changing the rules as we go. And inside of that there are three things that we put in tension all the time. And that is, we have to have cash to operate the business, keep the lights on and pay people like me. We have to hit our economic impact number, and we put the most value on what we sell to micro entrepreneurs, because that has most of the value stays there, and the least on a piece of clothing that we give away for free. So everything is different values. And then so it's cash, economic impact, and then we also have a metric that we want 2/3 of all we do to go into a certain kind of micro enterprise, which is what we call selling the shoes, and free. So 2/3 of the product has to go into this mission-oriented piece. So with those three things always in tension, like our COO, Mike, I mentioned, he gets his team together and says, all right, we have goals for each of these. They are not the same. How do we make this trade-off this week? How do we do it this week? How do we do it this week? And so it's very alive for us. So I hope that answers a little bit of your question. Yeah.
I had another question. You talked about having a huddle every day with all employees?
Not all employees. Every team is in a huddle. Once a week, we get all hands together, and then every day, teams are in huddles in smaller groups.
And how long are those huddles, and what do you guys talk about?
So the format's the same for everybody. It's based on priorities, which you saw here. So in addition to the company priorities, everybody has their own for the quarter. And then we get together and say, we answer 3 questions. Shout out for anybody who did something great the day before. What's important things for my team to know that happened yesterday? What's the most important things I'm working on today? So it might be 10 or 15 minutes. And I mentioned David was a problem solver. Like when I first came to him with this idea of a line, he's like, no effing way are we having a meeting every day. And now people won't miss it. Like it's just 10 or 15 minutes keeps everybody informed and aligned in a way that you could never do with email and 1 meeting a week and that sort of stuff. So it sounds crazy. It definitely saves time in the long run.
So in hindsight, when the media hit hard, what would you do differently now, knowing how the media was covered? And what comes to mind is there's a brand of water that was sold by a very big coffee chain that was a for-profit, and the media coined a term for them called charitable profiteering. Mm-hmm. And the concept of that was, we're here to make a lot of money, we're going to give a little bit of money to charity, and then everybody's going to think we're great, but in the meantime, we're encouraging people to buy it because they think they're doing something great, but it's just helping us make money more so than the charity. And it sounds like maybe you were lumped into that negative piece of it, and the lack of understanding between what a charity does and what a for-profit company does. Did that impact you? And again, after the negative media hit, what did you learn and how would you handle that differently now?
Yeah, so all that hit before I came, so part of it is me answering it in the abstract. I will say the one thing that was clear to me that the leadership team and the board got wrong, I'll be that explicit at the time, they thought this was some kind of knucklehead reporter and there's no story here. Well, it turned out the guy was a great reporter and he also knew a lot about social enterprise. So this business model, which is hard to explain, like we do make money, but it is a not-for-profit, he knew that and he's like, something's wrong here. And so then they put on the website, we're gonna fight the Tennessee and they don't know what they're talking about. You just lose that battle. So the one thing that we did do differently, long before this story appeared, so I came in 2012, we probably had Bob Smiatana, who was the reporter, come out in 2013, and we said, and he came out with a guy, like they were totally prepared for us to stonewall them or BS them again. And we had drawn out our business model on a whiteboard, like here it is, here's where the money goes, here's why we're losing money, here's where we're going. And he was, like, he came in ready to fight, and we're like, no, dude, here's everything. We're gonna be totally transparent with you. And he's like, okay, I guess there's no story here, right? So there wasn't a follow-up bad story, and I think transparency, which is one of the reasons it's our values, was fundamental to that. I mean, we were fixing things, and we told the truth about all that. I said to him, selling shoes is a great thing, not something to be embarrassed about. And once we started being honest, and then he got more intrigued by the business model, we had a totally different kind of conversation. So I don't know what I would have done then. That seems like what I came into. So, yes.
Can you talk a little bit about when you were hired and the gentleman that was your colleague that passed was hoping for that position, how you built that relationship to be a positive? Because I think in our organization and any organization, it's all about the people.
Yeah.
If you don't have the people, it's just buildings and ideas. So I'm interested to hear how that was a success story, because many, many times that's not a success story.
Yeah. That's a great question. Probably I need to think about it more. I will say the one thing that immediately comes to mind is that he and I talked about it almost from the beginning. And I said, look, if you don't want to, if this isn't a career path for you, you know, David he just turned 50, so I'm 7 or 8 years older than he is. If I'm going to be in your way, if you want to be the CEO, let's help you do that. So from the very beginning, we put it on the table. There was no like, hey, I know you want it, I'm going to act like I don't know that. And so it allowed us to talk about it. And it took a few years. David was an extraordinarily adaptable guy. So once it was on the table, he said, well, let's just figure it out. I don't know the answer yet. And over the next couple of years, he said, actually, being a CEO sucks. I have no interest in the stuff that you're working on. Talking to the board, all the bullshit, I don't want to do it, but I like my COO role. And so he got deep in the groove in that. And then a few years later, when he took on the title of president, took on more responsibility, that made him feel cemented and supported in that role. So it took, a couple of years to get there. But again, mostly it was around being transparent and from the beginning saying, I know this is not what you wanted. How can I help you get what you want? And then it just evolved into this incredible partnership. Well, maybe one more, and then I think probably we're just about done.
Hi, buddy.
Hey, Deb.
Quick question. I think that a lot of people are probably wondering how you were able to say no layoffs. What was going through your mind when you made that decision? How were you able to stay true to that decision?
Yeah. So look, first, I have to say a lot of good luck, and I'll come to that in a second. But the early decision was almost exactly as I shared before, and that is, we just didn't want people to worry about it. We knew we had money in the bank, and we had this great team, and we didn't want to lose them. So let's just make the commitment. And we said, for a year, this fiscal year, and well, that was at 15 months, nobody's going to lose their job. The thing that happened, so that was just a commitment. Like, it was a gut kind of thing, like we need to do this. The good luck part is, and when we made the commitment, we didn't know. So between March 2020 and let's say June 2020, retailers closed their stores, brands, they had warehouses full of stuff. And they panicked. Like they said, hey, just come and get it. We don't even know what we're sending to you. We just need the space. So it turned out that we were prepared for kind of a winter of product donations, and our used shoe donations cut in half. Like people couldn't go outside and drop things off. So a big part of our business dried up immediately. But on the new product side, there was incredible supply. And that allowed us to maintain good financial health. And so we were able to honor that promise and even expand a little bit after that first year. But so some of it was principle. Thank God for good luck, right? So I have to acknowledge that too.
So how can we, as the association community, help?
Thank you for asking that. Look, what drives we're a 501c3, right? We have philanthropy, people donate individually to our organization and corporate foundations, all that's super important. Jamie, our head of marketing and communications, is here, so I want to be careful what I don't say. But in terms of what the people in this room can do, what drives the entrepreneurs that you saw, what really makes this kind of long-term change, especially outside the US, is used shoes and clothes. So anything that you can do to, and we've had this, we've had bankers associations and footwear, podiatrist associations. So some of the kind of organizations that belong to ASAE have said to their members, let's do this. Maybe it's at a conference, maybe it's, we have a great partnership with Zappos, for example, where people can mail in their shoes and clothes and Zappos will pay for the shipping, so it doesn't always have to be together. Anything that we can do to increase the supply of used shoes has a giant and immediate impact on entrepreneurs in the developing world. And so I think because you represent millions of members, all of whom have shoes and clothes in their closets that they aren't wearing, they aren't using, and they often don't know what to do with, right? Still, sadly, most of us throw them in the trash. Whatever you do, don't do that. That's the worst. Take them to Goodwill, take them to a local thrift store. That's creating jobs and income for that organization. I think I can really be confident in saying, if you donate your used shoes and clothes to Soles4Souls, it directly has an impact that you saw today, and that's probably one of the most powerful things that the association world can do. All right, 1 minute left, so super. Thank you all very much. Really appreciate the time.